If I said to you, what great religious figure was the Son of God, born in a stable or cave at the end of December, who then grew up and he worked miracles, and then he died for the sins of men, but 3 days later he was raised up? Who is that? Well, as a matter of fact, it could be any of several dozen individuals. Osiris of the Egyptians, Adonis, Bacchus of the Greeks, and Baal of the Babylonians, Mithras of the Persians, they all fit that description. They were all sons of God, worshipped by their devotees, born the last week of December in a stable or cave, died for the sins of men, raised up on the third day, the rest of the story. As a matter of fact, Mithras was worshipped all around the Mediterranean more than 2,000 years ago. A very popular cult of Mithras. And his official title by the people who worshipped him was, he was the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. If that sounds familiar, it's because it says in the Bible that the first time John the Baptist saw Jesus, he said, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." So I don't believe John the Baptist ever said that. People have been saying that long before him about somebody else. I don't mean to, offend, but what I'm getting at is that if somebody thinks they've got a new story, it's an old story. You have a situation, for example, the Quran says, "Who pledges loyalty to the messenger pledges loyalty to Allah." Now, if you took that verse loose from the Quran, you might say, you see, this means Muhammad is God, astaghfirullah. Because it says, "Who pledges loyalty to the messenger pledges loyalty to Allah." You could bend and shape it however you like, but put it back where it came from. Consider all of the verses that are very clear on this subject and realize whatever it means, it doesn't mean that. Now compare that to what a person will do if he takes hold of one of the reported sayings of Jesus, where he said, "Who honors me honors God." And people say, "Oh, you see, he was God." That's what he said. "You honor me, you honor God. Because I am God," is what they wish he would have said, but he didn't finish that way. So it may mean that, but put it back where it came from and compare it to the other things he's reported to have said, and whatever it means, it can't mean that. It's reported that he said on one occasion, "There are things which God knows which I don't know." Now, whoever says that isn't God. God knows what I don't know. So I'm not God. Seems like the only way you can understand that. So what happens when you take a verse and you give it a meaning like "who honors me honors God" means he's God, and you're confronted with another one which clearly indicates that, no, who says this can't be God? Well, what people do is they give it a label, and that makes it go away. There's a collection of things like that where Jesus says, for example, "God is greater than I am, and God knows what I don't know, and I never said a thing except what God told me to say," and so on. They put that in a collection. It's called "The Difficult Sayings of Jesus." It's difficult, all right. It's difficult because it doesn't fit with these other ideas. But to give it a label doesn't make it go away. That's something like if you have a problem you can't solve, you work on it for a long time and then decide, "Oh, I know what I do with this. I put it in this box labeled unsolved problems." There, it takes care of that. This is an unsolved problem. That doesn't finish the matter. It seems more likely that the labels ought to be switched, if anything, that the things which people say are clear are actually the ones which should be causing them some difficulties. The things which they call difficult are the ones that are clear. Statements like "God knows what I don't know" is very clear. That ought to be labeled clear. Then the other one doesn't look very difficult at all. Whatever it means, you know what it doesn't mean. Now, people who come to me frequently and say, "I don't believe in God. You can't prove there is a God." Well, as one man has said about 60 or 70 years ago now, he said, people who start off with that statement have already skipped a question. they said God, but what do they mean when they say God? Which God do I have to tell you I believe in? What I always tell people when they say, I don't believe in God, I usually say, which God don't you believe in? Tell me about the one you don't believe in. Probably I don't believe in him either. After you explain him to me, you mean the God that sits on a chair with a long white beard and rolled up his sleeves one day 6,000 years ago and made man and huffed and puffed and had to sit down and rest after that? That's the God you mean? I don't believe in that one. And so on. There's many other ideas that people have. The key question comes before this. What do you mean? You said God. You tell me about this God I'm supposed to defend to you. So it is, in fact, that if you really do not commit excess, if you don't say more than you have authority for saying, the Muslim may find himself in the position sometimes, I've had it happen, when you explain what it is you believe about God, people will say, I thought you had a religion. That's atheism. There's no God there at all. Because that's one of the attributes of Allah. Al-Latif has a shade of meaning in Arabic. It means the subtle. It means whatever you say about God, you must say this, he is Al-Latif. He's so subtle, he almost isn't even there. Because he's so unfamiliar to anything that you might have in mind. Whatever you think he is, well, you're wrong. Al-Latif. A related word is used in Arabic when they talk about a fabric that's gossamer, the kind of, it's fabric, but you can read the newspaper through it. It's one of the attributes of Allah. Very subtle.
I had a minister in my home, that'd be about 7 years ago, and we were talking, and the Quran was sitting on the floor with the title facing down, so he didn't know which book it was. And I just pointed to the book. I said, I have confidence in this book. Well, he looked, but he didn't know which book it was. He said, well, I'll tell you, if that's not the Bible, it was written by a man. So I said, let me tell you something about what's in that book. And in just 3 or 4 minutes, I told him a few things about what is in the Quran. And after 3 or 4 minutes, he said, you're right. He said, a man didn't write that book. The devil wrote it. That's a very quick decision to make. It's what the Meccans used to say. Some of them, they said the devil brought him that. But just as with every other suggestion made, the Quran gives an answer. It says in one verse in particular, it says, do they say this came from Satan? Remind them of this. And it gives an argument in reply to that. There are many arguments in reply to that suggestion. For one thing, the Quran tells us that it says when you read this book, you're supposed to be in the habit, before you read this book, to say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, which means I take refuge in Allah from Satan, the rejected. Is this how Satan writes a book? He tells you, before you read my book, ask God to save you from me. That's very, very tricky. A man could write something like that, but can Satan do that? Can Satan put that in his book? Would God allow Satan to do that?
يوم تبدل الأرض غير الأرض والسماوات وبرزوا لله الواحد القهار.
On the day when the earth will be changed to other than this earth, and the heavens also will be changed, and they will come forth unto Allah, the One, the Almighty.
وترى المجرمين يومئذ مقرنين في الأصفاد.
Thou wilt see the guilty on that day linked together in chains.
سرابيلهم من قطران وتغشى وجوههم النار.
Their raiment of pitch, and the fire covering their faces.
ليجزي الله كل نفس ما كسبت إن الله سريع الحساب.
that Allah may repay each soul what it hath earned. Lo, Allah is swift at reckoning.
هذا بلاغ للناس ولينذروا به وليعلموا أنما هو إله واحد وليذكر أولو الألباب.
This is a clear message for mankind, in order that they may be warned thereby, and that they may know that He is only one God, and that men of understanding may take heed.